whatever term you prefer, whatever term you
Oh,
like.
Dr. O's fine. When I was in the army, they called
Mhm.
me doctor, and that was years before I went to medical school.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
and then when I went to medical school and I started working on the floors as a young student doctor and then as a more experienced doctor in years to come, everybody called me Dr. O. And so I'm just called Dr. O. And some of the kids just call me Dr. Well, they make up words, you see, along the
Mm.
way. And anyway, I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you. Um, we have a couple of students with us, one of whom is my wife. There's another young man who's from Malaysia listening in on our discussion right now. And I'm very pleased because people like yourself and those who are listening into the conversations that I have with like yourself and others in these days, they are an answer to prayer, you see. And you can probably sentiment, identify with this sentiment, because once you realize that the Ummah has been hoodwinked, you become marginalized. And I was double and triply marginalized as an alim because, first of all, I'm a convert. Secondly, I don't speak Arabic. And
Mm.
thirdly, I'm just a white guy, you see. And when white guys um, convert, they're very, very, very popular, but the popularity wanes. I noticed as time goes by, especially if the white guy doesn't start to dress like the traditional imams, you see.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
I didn't carry a stick and I didn't put one of those turbans on and I didn't wear the long, what's it called, abaya, the long robes and all
Mm.
that sort of thing. So that put me on the border. And then when I started asking questions that no one wanted to answer, I was further marginalized. So when you're lonely like that and you're trying to use the reason that Allah gave us to use, especially to become the Muslim, to become the human being, to become the true Khalifa, first of all, over your own nafs. You see, you become lonely. It becomes lonely. And I'm 73 now, and I've been writing about the New World Order and some criticism, some sound criticism of Islam for years now. And
Mm.
this gets me further and further marginalized. Now, mind you, when I was an alim actually doing research and writing and rubbing shoulders with these fellows on Jum'ah day, um, I had certain of them come to visit me, kind of like Nicodemus going to visit Jesus, in
Mm.
secret. And
Mm.
they would say, "Well, yes, we agree with you, but it's not politically correct. We can't say this. We can't talk about that." And I said to one fellow, I said to him, I said, "Why are you cowards?" And he was immediately
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine.
immediately insulted, especially because he was a martial artist and had a black belt in Silat. You see, now,
Mm.
Silat is the knife fighting of the Indonesians, and they're very, very good at it. And so, yeah, there's a certain amount of cowardice that's taking place on an individual basis and on a collective basis. The point I'm trying to make is I've been alone so long, and made a prayer, a special prayer, though. I said, "Please, Allah, please bring some students up behind me who are going to take up this battle, take up this flag, and become part of the vanguard." And lo and behold, after after many many years and a few beginning a few years ago, I'm beginning to meet people like yourself and others, and I'm having conversations, and everything that I suspected when I first crossed the border into Alindum if I can
Mm.
use that word, um, is coming to pass. I mean, everything I suspected is coming to pass as being confirmed truth.
Isn't that
So, I
fantastic?
mean, I used to look. It doesn't take a genius. You don't have to be a genius. I had a high IQ years ago. I don't know if it's still up there, but in any case, it doesn't take a genius to look at what we do know about, or what we think we know about the prophet and Medina, and realize that, hey, the story they've given us is not what we imagine it could have been, or should have been, or probably was.
Mm.
When I look at the prophet's housing in Medina, his wives lived all along one border of this rather open court. And so, hey, they didn't have, each one of them did not have a mansion like the modern Muslim women are demanding, you see. Well, if you're going to get Rolls Royce for her, I want one too. Yeah, this sort of thing. I said, no, no.
Mm.
When those women woke up in the morning, after greeting their Lord, their source creator, they then greeted each other and said, how are we going to help our husband today? That
Mm.
had to be at the core of their heart. Otherwise, they couldn't live under such a circumstance. There had to be a sense of a esprit de corps in partnership with their spouse, Muhammad, you see. So this was a household that people were coming to, and they were calling it a masjid. And I said, well, that we have a masjid now, but it's nothing like that. And I said, well, this masjid, I don't know what it really was, but it seems to me this was a place where decisions were made. And,
Mm.
I
Exactly.
kind of
Yep.
just stopped there. I said, well,
Mm.
this is a place where things got decided, and then authority was delegated, and then things went out to get done. The dean went out, you see,
Mm.
from the prophet's home.
Mm. No,
Well,
absolutely.
suppose
Interesting to see. Yeah, how you came
you
along to
see,
that
so
on your path. Yeah.
yeah, I was 55 when I converted, so I was an older fellow, and I come in and I look at this and I say, oh, well, that just makes sense to me, but nobody's talking about that. Everybody's talking about the polygamy and making this into a masjid, and he must
Mm.
have. And then I said, oh gosh, where are these 500 sermons that they must have had on Jummah?
Mm.
They don't exist, you see. So what I'm trying to say, brother, is that I suspected all of these things by fitra. You see,
Mm.
my noodle was working, and I looked at this, and perhaps it was one of my colleagues said, "Look, you're a convert. You got one foot in, one foot out. It's easier for you to be objective." And I said, "Yeah,
Mm.
okay. Well, I'm also." And then another colleague said, "Well, you might as well just keep on going, but don't get me involved because
Yes.
it's not safe." And you can do this because another one said, look, we're just apologizing for you out here because you're the ignorant foreigner convert, okay? But
Mm.
secretly we agree with you, but they got to speak out of both sides of the mouth. And
Correct.
then when I'm considering this, I said, well, how can they be honoring the truth? Then the next logical question, after a series of logical deductions, is how can they possibly be guided, you see,
Mm.
if they're going to ignore the truth? And then I decided years ago, this is shameful. Now, Alhamdulillah, now I'm coming across people like yourselves and others, and they're confirming all of these things which I had come to know just based on my own powers of deduction as a kind of detective. Doctors have to be detectives, So,
Mm.
and I learned how to examine a patient and how to um, get what I needed to know by asking a careful history. You see,
Mm.
and that's the major part of diagnosis is not the physical exam; it's taking the careful history. A doctor worth their salt and who's really, really and truly knowledgeable knows within 3 minutes what's wrong with the patient.
Correct.
After that,
Yeah.
it's just a question of confirming, and then getting a second or maybe third opinion, and then planning treatment. So I'm not going to go into my history here because I know, brother, I have a lot of people interested in you, and somebody, one of my students, I don't remember who, brought you to my attention just a couple of weeks ago. I had a quick listen to one or two of your lectures, and my wife and I have been listening ever since because it's refreshing. Besides, you've got a really nice voice and it's calming. So it's kind of
Mhm.
therapeutic to listen to you. So I want to know a couple of things from you, dear brother,
Mhm.
for the sake of our listeners. All right, I'm not interested in solving any of the Islam's problems right now. I want to know how it is that you came to your present position of. I don't know what to call us. Are we Quranists? Are we revisionists? We just
Quran
honest human
centric,
beings?
probably. Yeah.
Say again, what?
Quran centric probably would be the better way
Quran
to
centered, yes. I'm
yeah, or
looking for,
centric. Hmm.
yeah, yeah, I'm looking for words that are going to help to describe what's taking place here. And my colleagues and I are in the process of, it's spontaneously happening. People like Benjamin Bilal and Mahir El and a few others,
Hmm.
Abdul Karim, we're forming this sacred circle. Okay, now the sacred circle, according to the Oroma tradition, which is right across the Red Sea from where the prophet was, is that's the circle of the elders. You see, the informed
Hmm.
elders,
Hmm.
and this is how it is with every tradition. Now, the informed elders, they get together and they will hand around a talking stick when they're talking about something serious in their hogan, and every traditional society has something like this. And I won't go into the permutations of it, but we're in the middle of doing that. And I'm so happy to see young people like yourself, so happy to see people like Mohammed Irfan, who's just joined us now behind the scenes right now. His assignment is to listen carefully and to um, map out an approach to further steps after this interview so that we can establish a youth group.
Hmm.
Something like that. This is what I'm thinking about now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear you looking for a conversation, you see.
Hmm.
And I looked at this as an old guy looking at over this young guy's shoulder, and I saying, "This guy needs to talk to somebody. He needs to talk to reasonable people who are going to sit around the fire with him, sit around the circle with him, and bounce these ideas off. They're going to pass the talking stick around in a sacred manner and seek guidance, seek inspiration through the conversation, which, if we believe the hadith, one of the hadith said the prophet was passing by a group of men who were talking about the Quran. He said, "This is better than dua. This is better than prayer." And
Hmm.
so that's what we are doing here. That's what I'm attempting to do. So I'm not some superstitious old fart here. I'm
Hmm.
right here with my senses, all six, seven, eight, 12 of them, whatever we've got, and I'm trying to get them all to work together in a Tawheed fashion so that my nafs will become obedient to me and not
Hmm.
cross the boundaries. You see, that's our goal. If we do that, and we make that a point, we become Sufis without being Sufis. You see, if I can use that term, I think it's successful. What's most successful is to find relevance, the relevance of what it is that Al Islam is meant to be, because what they
Hmm.
gave us is not what it was meant to be. So, how did you come to that realization yourself? When did you wake up to that fact that the Islam that they handed us is not Al Islam? Dear
Hmm.
brother, would you share with us, inshallah?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just, by the way, thinking of some of the terms. One of the terms that seen used quite a lot in the Arabic world is tanviriyun. So people who think, people who bring along the nur, So that, I think, is a very, very apt definition of those who wish to bring back the Quran in its light. All right, I'll return to the question you asked. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I think it's awesome that we are having conversations like this, and more often going forwards as well, because there is a movement that is growing. More people are turning towards the Quran, which is a fantastic thing. And instead of all of us huddling, into our own little cocoons or setting up ivory towers, much rather, in my opinion, we talk, even if there are disagreements on the finer points. We should have the same approach regardless. On a personal level, I guess my journey goes back about Ramadan of 2019. That is before the COVID world, so pre-COVID era, so to speak. I'd always wanted to learn the Quran, and I'd always said, I've had a few questions as well. Yeah, the purported age of Aisha and the sex slaves, and as my daughter was born, she is 13 now. That had brought on more urgency as well, because I remember when the time came to do aqiqah for her, the tradition in Pakistan was to have one goat for a daughter and two that you slaughter for a boy. And straight away, those questions were beginning to form, germinate, those nasty, awkward things, niggles that you just couldn't ignore anymore, because you could tell that time goes on. You got a daughter now, you'll have a son, which I did end up having. We're going to be deciding the future for them. So it was something I could not ignore. So yeah, 2019 was when I started reading. I picked up the Quran for the first time and said, I'm not just going to read it without understanding, like us Pakistanis do. We just read it without really following what the words mean. Well, let's try and read with translation. So that's where I started. And one of the, I guess the reasons, one of the motivations was that I was complaining to somebody quite dear to me. I complained to them and said, oh, I wish I could learn Arabic. I wish I could speak. I wish I could understand the Quran. I wish I could play the guitar. I wish I could write books, etc. And the person said, oh, I wish I could dance. I wish I could. And they said, what's stopping you? You're an adult, for goodness sake. Your parents didn't teach you. Sure, they didn't. You wanted to. They didn't. You can't complain. You can't keep, pulling the same excuse over. So that was like the wake-up call for me. So a lot of activities started, Quran being one of them. A long story short, I guess, once I picked it up, it was the usual journey of, you start from the Quran, you're relying on translations from people, and slowly and gradually, even with those translations, you start picking up problems. Like suddenly they're changing the themes, they're mixing future with the present, with the past. They're bringing in along all sorts of people. All of a sudden, sometimes it's historical stuff, sometimes it's going past, and then you start digging deeper. It was more the realization that the terms I'm reading, the Quranic terms, they don't match what I thought them to be. So Salah, Kafir, Kitab, Mushrik, Jihad, all of that, what I thought, is not what I'm reading. And then it's like, I think as you said, Dr. O, the Muhammad I'm reading about is not the Muhammad I was told about. The Muhammad I was told about was this king prophet. In Pakistan and India, it's common to believe that the world is made for him. Everything. He is the Habibullah. He is the love of Allah. Astaghfirullah. That everything is that we see here is because of him. And the more I read the Quran, what I'm finding is a humble, honest man, sincere man who's on a path to learning. Sometimes he's making mistakes. He's not perfect. He keeps on saying, I don't have anything that you ascribe to me. But then I come out of this book and I go listen to my friends or the masjid or the imam, and they're telling me something different. So all of those things just kept adding. Then you read those brackets and those tafasir, and it's like, right, where did you get all of that from? All of these brackets that you added, you ended up changing the meaning. And then when you ask questions as they arrive, I think, and you mentioned that again, it's shut your mouth. Don't ask too many questions. It is how it is. It's how our Salaf, our pious predecessors, they said it. It's up to us to not question, to not argue. We are people of naqal, and we say it proudly. It's a badge of shame that we would bear very proudly to say, oh, and this famous purported saying of Ali, where he was asked, why do you do wudu in a certain way? Why do you not wash the soles, but just wipe the top part? Wouldn't that be more logical to do it the other way around? And he goes, we don't use our mind. We're not meant to use our aql. And that just blew my mind, because the Quran I was reading, the message that was given to the messenger was all about aql, all about using your mind,
Yes.
questioning,
Mm-hmm.
pondering,
Mm-hmm.
bringing up questions. Ibrahim, this famous, I would say the philosopher prophet,
Mm-hmm.
he's
Yes.
teasing out, challenging, bringing up ideas. It doesn't go out to
Mm-hmm.
smash idols. I've talked about that in the Urdu video.
Mm-hmm.
Such a
Yes.
man, his legacy was meant to be followed by Muhammad, the messenger. And somehow that just transformed into, we're just going to read these books, books after books after books, and stick to them. And you can't get past that. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably rambling, so I'll shut up. There are a lot of events that happen in the journey, but yeah, it's been about, I'd say, 4.5 years. I'm just a student, just on
So
the path.
this flood of revisionist impulse, this flood is like a tsunami. It came with your daughter's birth. Was there anything else that accompanied this? I mean, how did you experience your spiritual eyes actually opening?
I'll be very honest. The spiritual
Mm-hmm.
aspect is something. I'm not really a spiritual guy. If I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
from a generic perspective, those experiences that we have. People talk about. I wish I could share. For me, it's always been a logical pursuit of.
I'm
Sorry, go
not.
on.
I'm not referring to any supernatural event. What I'm referring to is there must have been a change in your consciousness that almost, how shall I say, shook you. Okay, in a sense. I mean, you were touched by something here. You must have felt something besides just wanting to become a better person. You must have felt a sense of urgency or a sense, it's like the light bulb going off, being turned on
Mm.
in complete darkness. What happened to you? It wasn't just. I mean, was it something like you looking at your innocent daughter's baby face there, and whoosh, this Quranist spirit of the Quranist centric innovator or interrogator or inquisitor suddenly possesses you. I mean, it must have been
Yeah,
a
there-
constellation of events. I'm looking for a
mm,
constellation because with your daughter we have this feminine aspect. Okay, it's the nurture. So something in you realize that you've been taking milk from the wrong breast, so to speak,
mm.
metaphysically. Okay, so what led you to the right breast? It wasn't just your daughter. There must have been something. Somebody must have looked over your shoulder and said, "Yeah, that's the right path." You see, and let's go for it.
I've yeah, and
I'm
I don't.
surmising here.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
I understand where you're coming from. I don't think
Yeah.
there's anything in particular that the one eureka or the one
Hmm.
moment that kind of started it all.
Hmm.
From
Hmm.
my perspective, it's mostly been, I've always had those questions, and I've always been open
Hmm.
because when I moved from Pakistan for further education, I did my
Hmm.
bachelor's, master's, and eventually PhD from overseas as well.
Hmm.
When I did all of that, I naturally, being inquisitive, I was visiting churches and Hindu temples and
Hmm.
gurudwaras and all of those different parts of reaching the divine, so to speak. And I'd be seeing the same kind of conversations everywhere. We've got
Hmm.
that path, we've got that
Hmm.
direction, we've got answers to all questions, etc., etc. But then when I would dig deeper, I'd find the same problems and same questions that lay unanswered that I would find in the Islamic side. So I was like, this is a human
Hmm.
problem that I'm looking at,
Hmm.
which is we are
Hmm.
all, regardless of religion, very happy to follow tradition blindly. We don't
Hmm.
tend to ask questions, but particularly the more religious you become, especially in our tradition, the less likely you are to use your mind. So
Hmm.
it was all of that kind of pushing me, and then the daughter she was born, and then the son came
Hmm.
along after that. So suddenly I'm like, well, culturally and religiously, according to the second Islam that's presented as a real Islam, I'm now meant to
Hmm.
differentiate between them. The daughter is not the
Hmm.
same as the son. They're not gonna inherit the same from me. I'm gonna have
Hmm.
to be worrying about one in a different way than the other. And then, as I said, I think for me personally, it would be just the realization when I had that chat. I
Hmm.
said, just do it. What's stopping you? You want to do all of those things. And that's when I opened the
Mm-hmm.
Quran, as in, not wanting to seek answers to any specific questions, apart from just being aware that what I know doesn't sit well with me.
When you reread the Quran, in light of what you've just disclosed, did you read the Arabic or the Urdu or translations? How did you go about this?
Yeah, so the approach that I followed was basically, because in the beginning I wasn't very good. So whilst I was taking Arabic lessons, I said,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what happens, I've got to read the Quran every day. So that was the bare minimum I set for myself
Uh-huh.
with translation.
Okay.
So I would go word by word by word. I'd take down notes. In the beginning, it was two ayat. It became three, became half a page.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it would become one
Mm-hmm.
page. It would take time. But I would say,
Mm-hmm.
unless I've clicked through every single word and at least kind of force my mind to take in the meaning at least once, I'm not going to go to the next one. So that was kind
Mm-hmm.
of the path I followed. And
Well, that's drudgery. That's hard work.
it is hard work, but that was the only way to keep myself honest. So it's like, if you want to,
Mm-hmm.
well, to give you an analogy, the guitar. I don't know
Sure.
if you play
Mm-hmm.
play a musical instrument. I
I,
can't see any
I'm
behind
a
you.
musician. I play the piano. I know about
Right.
the discipline. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, there you go. Right. So the guitar was probably, in hindsight, the worst instrument for a beginner to pick up. That too on his own.
Yes.
I had no one. I picked it up. I had
Mm-hmm.
watched a few YouTube videos. I kept playing it for
Mm-hmm.
3 days. My wife said, "I think it's not tuned," and then I realized I was meant to actually tune the strings. So
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, drudgery. Right. You got to go through the basics, no matter how
Mm-hmm.
how hard that might be, if you want to get to the next stage. And from my experience, having been part of the academia, having been part of this. I'd also
Mm-hmm.
started writing books at that time,
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi and epic fantasy books. I'd
Mm-hmm.
started publishing them as well. So again, same thing. You
Mm-hmm.
start with this
Mm-hmm.
fantastic idea. You got this
Mm-hmm.
idea of this is what you want in your story, right? But then it's all
Mm-hmm.
drudgery after that. You start writing,
Yes.
you got all these plot
Oh,
lines,
yes.
and then there
Yes.
comes the
Yes.
edits and edits after
Mm-hmm.
edits and revisions, and this never ends. So,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yes.
drudgery was not something that fazed me.
Mm-hmm. Well, how old were you when this epiphany occurred?
Yeah, about mid 30s.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah, but I'd
So.
always, yeah, I've talked about this on my channel. I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I was 18, 19, back
Mm-hmm.
in Pakistan, there was this girl, and just because we had a little tiff, I ended up looking back to her in front of the class and said, "Don't talk to me like this. You meant you
Mm-hmm.
only worth half of me." And she was
Ah.
shocked. She was
Oh,
shocked. She
yes.
was horrified. Everybody in the class looked
Mm-hmm.
around. And she said, "Stop
Uh-huh.
lying. That's not true." I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Look, ask the teacher." And the teacher
Mm-hmm.
had no choice but to agree to me. I felt real smug that day, but it's just
Yes,
one of
I
those
bet you
things that
did.
always stayed with
Mm-hmm.
me. It's like, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel fair. That doesn't feel right.
Yes.
It's it's
Yes.
it's not what you'd expect from the creator of it all.
Yeah. An entire war can be based on a straw man like that.
Mm.
Goodness me. Yes. Well, do you have any people like I had coming to speak to you in secret?
Um, well, the I don't really normally engage much with the local Pakistani community here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those who do know me know that I talk, and I think it's probably obvious here. I'm quite dry when I talk. It can be
Mm-hmm.
quite academic. So it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not about seeking fans or
Mm-hmm.
fanning fires or creating conflict for the sake of it. It's all about logic. It's all about evidence, and you very
Mm-hmm.
quickly find out the people who are not interested. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's somebody who's not interested, I, you know, I've learned the moment someone starts talking to me about these types of things that I talk about, it
Mm-hmm.
goes, there's only a few ways that the conversation can go. Either they'll shut up
Mm-hmm.
straight away, or they'll come back to me
Mm-hmm.
at some point and say, "What you're saying makes sense, but I like the rosy picture that is painted for me. I'd much rather just live
Yes.
there. Can you please not bring it up?" And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The third group would be who'd
Yeah.
ask and ask and ask, and eventually they just walk away. They just never come back to me, never talk to me. And the last group would be the group where very few mine would say, "Oh, you've actually
Mm-hmm.
sparked something. I want to know more." So
mm,
I've not had I'd say severe pushback, but
mm,
I, had I been in Pakistan though, where I still have relations, where I still have to visit, um, and this is an unfortunate thing that I don't think non-Pakistanis understand.
mm-hmm,
Being out and open, even saying what I'm saying, which is,
mm-hmm,
I would say, just scratching the surface, is enough to get
mm.
you in trouble. So whether you're in
Of course.
Saudi, whether you're in
Mm-hmm,
Pakistan, one person has to
mm-hmm,
say one thing about you,
mm-hmm.
and that's it.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Well, now let's switch the venue a little bit here. Let's go from talking about your experience of your epiphany to what you may or may not have learned about the early centuries of Islam since you made this turn. And I use the word term intelligently here, turn, because I'm writing a novel called The Time of Turning. And the Quran
Mm,
speaks about this turning away or turning to, turning away or turning to, you see. And the Quran has an awful lot of blows to be thrown that are thrown out of those who turn away. So you turned towards the truth, and you must have been very, how shall I say, occupied with the things, this drudgery, as we were talking about. You still must have been very occupied with the string of eureka moments that must have followed in the middle
mm,
of,
yes.
sifting through the mud
Yep.
and panning for the gold. I know that. I did that with the
Mm,
Bible. So um, I noticed during the first 200 years there was an awful lot of confusion going on, and nobody wanted to talk about this confusion except to say, oh, well, it's civil war, brothers killing each other. What do you expect? There's going to be confusion like that. I saw more than confusion. I saw some deliberate movements. It's kind of like having an opponent going against you in a court of law, and they keep on filing unnecessary motions, but they're necessary to defend the lie, you see, which is why they keep on doing it. Now, I noticed these inconsistencies along the way, and that I kept on trying to discuss this with my colleagues, and they wouldn't want to discuss it. I would say something in the middle of a conversation over it'd be a coffee table or a dinner or whatever the case might be, and I would say, "See, this is what happened. The Qurayshi won within one generation after the death of the Prophet. It's very
mm,
simple." You don't have to. You don't need a historian's, thesis here. You don't have to write 11 volumes just to prove the point. It's right there. The Qurayshi won. So everything that the Prophet gained was given back to them. You see, and nobody. It
mm,
was you could hear a pin drop. Nobody wants to talk about it. You see, there is some. It's very rare that you're going to have somebody want to pick this up and carry it forward because, well, it's Pandora's box, isn't it?
mm,
when you start to do that. So, and then here I am years later, after all of that prehistory, as a research fellow, and I come across another historian who's gone back, and this is granted, this is what do you call it, an Orientalist coming out of the Orientalist school, but hey, they're not all bad people. See,
mm,
you just can't throw what it is that they are discussing out with the baby. It's bathwater, and the baby's in there. You gotta,
mm,
take a look, see what more carefully what they're talking about. And this guy is an archaeologist, an Orientalist who's an archaeologist, and he went around to all of the remnants of the masjids that were built during the first 200 years or so.
talking about Dan Gibson. Yep.
Yeah, and he found that none of the Qiblas agreed, and that there were Qiblas that didn't even point to Mecca or Jerusalem. There were other Qiblas. So this is something recent. I come across that, and I said, "Well, gosh, they can't decide. They can't agree on how to pray, and they didn't know where the Qibla was." So I'm saying, okay, well, this is a little bit more chaotic than I thought. And perhaps, yeah, well, the civil wars are going to do that. You kill off the people who know things, and there's no one to replace them. And I also know that there's the scripture someplace. I think it's in Proverbs or something that says something to the effect that when Allah is about to judge a people, He removes the men and women of knowledge, takes them out. You see, that's the sunnah of Allah. And everyone wants to talk about Muhammad's sunnah, but nobody's talking about the sunnah of Allah. You
Mm.
see, so what have you discovered about the sunnah of Allah during those first 200 years or so when you reopened the books? You see, under this new influence of searching with a concentrated effort for the truth here.
Yeah, this is going to be very nuanced answer. I number,
Yes.
with all the disclaimers, I'm no historian. I know enough. I've read enough to have a
Hmm.
talk
Hmm.
about it.
Hmm.
But if somebody was to say, what are your references, or what about this person, that person, this is where I would say I would respectfully walk away from this conversation. Happy to listen, but I'm not in a position
Hmm.
to argue, because it
Hmm.
is a dedicated field, and there are people who
Yes.
specialize, and a couple that I know you have spoken with before, and they
Hmm.
know this part very well. My general
Yes.
impressions, having read all of this, as I would say, as an earnest reader, not as a scholar of that area, is that
Hmm.
there is a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of flux, as you've described it. Um,
Hmm.
what I was very interested in was what happened in the first 40 years. So this is
Yes.
when the first generation, or the Quraysh, Bani Umayyad, the Umayyad dynasty finally gets set up. What was there before? What's really
Hmm.
bizarre is that even if you take the version of history that comes down to us, we had 3 to 5 number of caliphs at the same time, all claiming the
Hmm.
mantle of the Islam, all leading deputations and
Hmm.
delegations of Hajj, all killing each
Hmm.
other, all fighting
Hmm.
at Makkah, destroying the
Hmm.
Kaaba. And it's the same
Hmm.
person who destroyed the Kaaba, who, by the way, sent his army to India as well, to my part
Hmm.
of subcontinent, where we all became Muslim as a result, ironically enough. So you got all of this
Hmm.
happening, where you got these caliphs fighting, killing, all within 40 years, but there's no
Hmm.
historical records, there's no documents, there's nothing that we can find of the first
Hmm.
40 years. Like, someone
Hmm.
has gone through and done a very good job of taking out all the admin literature, like all the admin artifacts. You don't even find
Hmm.
anything um,
Hmm.
of non-religious nature. It's like it's just been wiped. It's just been, someone has done a very good job of whitewashing it or appropriating
Hmm.
it. And it kind of makes sense, because even if you look at the narrative of the history, the full flow of it, you've got these
Hmm.
4 or 5 people all fighting in the name of Islam. Obviously, they're creating stories now at this point to justify themselves. Um, and you've got divisions that are very, very deep, that are becoming established straight away. And
Hmm.
obviously, what we are left with are the thoughts of the victors, the Umayyads, and after them the Abbasids. Um, all I say whenever these discussions start, Dr. O, is there's a lot that can be talked about history. There can be a lot of discussions to be had. We can always try and get closer and closer and closer to that truth that's always going to kind of remain ambiguous, just because I don't know how to say it in English, but if dhanni, it's always going to be subjective in a way. History is
Hmm.
always, you can never be 100% objective about what happened, because at the end
Hmm.
of the day, it's one person's perspective of what happened, who was just one part of a very complex mix. We just won't ever know, right? So all I
Hmm.
say is, my argument is very simple. I say we've got one thing that has come down through to us in two unanimous manners, which is the Quran. It's come through to us in written format, and it has come
Hmm.
down through to us by memorization, mass memorization, not those 7 or 10 qira'at as they make up. It's come
Hmm.
through unanimous. You could not have made it up. You could not have just written up copies and have them changed in one part or the other. I open that up, I read that in the same language that has been spoken, read, listened in all those intervening 14, 15 centuries. And I compare that to what you tell me, and the two don't match. So I see the Islam of the Quran, I see the terms, I see the Prophet, I see the instructions of Allah in that book, and then I see everything else that's been paraded in the name of Islam. And the two are they're just not the same thing. So what I've got here is, in my answer to these conversations, is I've got irrefutable evidence here in front of me, and we can keep doing it page by page, paragraph by paragraph, that proves that whatever happened has messed up what we have inherited as Islam. But what has not been corrupted is the other Islam that we have decided to ignore, which is encapsulated in the Quran. So yes, there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of known unknowns, a lot of unknown unknowns in that period, and who those parties were and what their motivations were. I was a defiant Sunni in my teenage life, always fighting the Shiites, right? So there were these online forums and my friends, and we would get into these heated discussions and debates, and would always start from 150 to 200 years after they did, because that's pretty much where our literature started.
Yes,
it's like
yes.
we couldn't even go back. We were always stuck. Well, in the case of Sunnah, we could, but in the Shia, they had to go even down the track. So 3-4 centuries after the Prophet's death is the stuff that we're talking about. But yeah, so all I say is, pick up any event that the history has brought to us as sacred, the story of the Mi'raj or Isra. Quran makes no mention. There's nothing like that. It's superimposition of something so foreign that you can't even panel beat into the Quran without a lot of brackets and twisting of meanings here and there. It doesn't match. But then, and there were some historical papers I read where the scholars compare the evolving story, the evolving narrative of the Mi'raj story, and how every generation after generation, the story is becoming more elaborate. It's becoming richer, which is not possible, shouldn't be possible. Only time a story becomes more richer with details is when you've got embellishers, storytellers, adding more and more things. And these are the same people that have passed us all of these other sacred sayings. So it's a topic that I've got views on. I think they've come through. But from my perspective, I always go back to the Quran, because for me this is the true Furqan here. This is, hey guys, all of these terms, the religion you made up, it doesn't even match. It contradicts what I see in the Quran. And here's all the evidence. Let's talk about that, where we can latch onto, we can anchor. I'm not going to talk about, because I don't know if you've ever been into discussions with Sunni versus Shia, or anytime you go to history, it's always this book said this author said that, but in that narration, that one person was deemed as so-and-so by that person. It's a labyrinth that you can't get out of. It's quicksand that you just sink in, and it's a mess that is always, what's the term I'm looking for? It's infinite regress. You keep going. There are always these pathways for these clever people to get out of, and the conversation doesn't end anywhere. You never get to any conclusion. So all I say is I've read that. I understand the narrative, the overall thrust of history. So if I'm being reasonable, I can't say that, I can't buy into Gibson's ideas on they just made it up. The Prophet wasn't even there. He was in Petra somewhere. I find it very, it's against everything I know about history. I'm not just reading the Arabic history. If I do that, I know nothing about the Aryans. I know nothing about the African traditions. I know nothing about anybody, right? Because if I keep doing that, everything is made up. At a certain level, it becomes counterproductive. All I say is we've got the thrusts of history, the full weight that you can't have been made up, but they're the individual events and actors and all sorts of motivations. People doing things, being people doing things because they want to be gathering power, and we see all of that in our history, just as we see it anywhere else. The Arabic history, the Persian history, the Indian history, the Ottoman history, they're not sacred histories. They're people, men like me and you, who wanted power, and they did whatever they could to clutch onto it.
Yes, that's pretty much the story, and that brings us to real political science, which is not really the focus of our discussion here. But it's an adjunct, and I suppose that on occasion you've got to touch those tangents and see where it is that they can land safely in the locution of the narrative, because we're all reciting the zikr, if you will. And that's
Yeah.
why we go back to the Quran to find it. Now,
If
there are
I could,
certain people. Yes, go ahead.
if I could just quickly add, I think you made a very
Yeah.
good point there, Dr. O. Um,
Hmm.
so Salat was something that I knew I had to address that point there, because
Yes.
I'm not one of those who just can hand wave this practice away and say, oh, it's just all made up. It got made up
Hmm.
200 years, 200 years after the Prophet. That's not how I understand history to work, because in my
Hmm.
understanding of what I see, it needed to have gone back sufficiently back enough close to the Prophet's time for this to have become this mass adopted practice that no one recorded or wrote down. They just passed from one to the other, right?
Hmm.
So I took that and I compared that to the Quran. And yes, there are these connections that you find, and you can see why a particular form becomes associated with a certain concept in the book. But then it's a nuanced understanding that we must establish if we are to be honest students of Islam, of history, of the Quran, and how all of these things kind of interject. For those
Hmm.
who would divorce themselves from all fields and just focus on one, I think it's a disservice by not looking at the whole picture. So you need to be able to reconcile what you see from all these different perspectives, as you was putting it, in order to see the whole properly.
At least try.
At least
No.
try. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you something a bit more pointed with respect to maybe a follow up to this conversation. Would you be interested? Let me not ask the question yet. Let me give you a sort of a lead up to the question. In the occult world, they mirror everything that is associated with the what we might want to consider to be the kingdom of God, as the Christians like to say. And
Mm.
this is a sort of divine order, and I'm exploring this in one of my conversations with instructor Benjamin Bilal right now. And it's taking us in a direction that I think is very good for ourselves and for the students who are coming up behind us. But the occult world, these wicked men in high places whom the Quran speaks about, are digging their old hole, digging their own holes into hell, if you will. Um, they have a system, all right, and one of the systems, the one that really overthrew all of the ancient regimes in Europe, is the system of the youth movements. You see, they work.
Mm.
You had the young Italy, young Germany, young Irish, young all these youth movements all over. I think we need something similar. You see, to um, to 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 comfort. You see, I'm going to use that word advisedly because in the Gospel of Barnabas, it speaks about the comforters coming in. Of course, the Christians have their twist on this and they call it the Holy Spirit. But when you have light shown on the truth, it's a great comfort. And many of our youth coming up here, they're discomfited because there's no light being shown on the truth in any kind of systematic way. So, what I'm asking here, and the reason I asked, for example, young student Mohammed Orfan to join us behind the scenes, I'll introduce you all in good time. Maybe not this meeting, but the next meeting. I want to float some ideas out there with you because I believe in taking advantage of the moment. Okay. So Allah
Mm.
has given us this moment, and I want to. I don't want to prostitute it, so to speak, but I want to use it. You see, if Allah is
Mm.
going to give you something, say more Rahim grace, He's got a bucket full of Rahim grace, He's handing it to you. You got to reach up there and grab it, and then figure out what you're going to do with it. So that's what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing that you and people like yourself, people like Muhammad Urfan, who's sitting behind the scenes here, a gift of grace. Why? Because the will and the intention and the giftings are there. The ability, the potential is there to make a difference in the lives of people who are coming up. So I'm wondering if you would be interested in getting involved with some sort of a youth group here that we set up as part of our sacred circle online. It's not to institutionalize it, but to, I don't know, give it a die someplace, a DAIS, a place to rest,
Mm.
you see. And so that if people can come and say, hey, that pillow looks awfully nice, let's go sit over there. And
Mm.
well, what are you going to do? We're going to sit and talk about the things that are important. Ah, okay. You mean relevance. How many times have you had friends come to you, especially young people, and say, give me some relevance, doc. What's going on here? I don't see how Islam is relevant to my life. I've spent 25 years learning how to speak a language that I can't use. And now I'm ready to take a wife, and I don't have any skills to earn a living by, so I can support her. But I can
Mm.
speak Arabic and I memorize the Quran.
Yeah.
You see, they can't
No,
even change
mm.
they have no skills. So all of this is time wasting. So when I say, okay, let's maybe look at establishing some sort of a youth group here. You see, what I imagine people like Mohammed Irfan, who's listening to us right now, and saying, "Oh, yeah, that's something I'd like to get involved in." Well, this is what you do when you are doing education of the young group in any kind of institutionalized setting. You find out the students with the protean character, and then you give them a position of authority,
Mm.
you see, and you let them take the die and give them the hammer, and so they can stand there and learn how to speak, learn how to ask the right questions, and then you sit back and you advise them, you see, from time to time. So I am imagining someone like yourself and someone like Mohammed sitting, establishing a sort of a conference, Quran centered discussion group, primarily for the youth to answer their questions. Okay, look, the youth, they don't mind sitting around talking to old guys like me, but hey, if you got somebody who's a little bit, look, you don't send kids to summer camp with old camp counselors. You
Mm.
send them to summer
Mm.
camp with young camp counselors who can still run the 5 miles and climb the trees and all this sort of thing. Someone closer to their age, someone who's it's easier for them to identify with. I mean, it's not that people get tired of talking to me like this, but hey, sometimes I get caught up in some idea and I go off and I'm no longer relevant to that moment in time. So if
Mm.
we have a youth group, you see, and we have people like yourself and youth, Mohammed is very, very keen, very intelligent, very well informed, 16 years old. And I'm thinking about putting him in a position where he's kind of like the chairman of this little group, and you're his faculty advisor. You see, and they've got
Mm.
questions to fire off, and let's see. Well, they can try to answer them themselves, but you can also help to fill out the answer. You see, with the little bit of illumination that Allah has given you to provide them with the relevance. Is this something that you would be interested in doing? Is this something that you could fit into your life right now? Because I see you looking for a conversation like this. Is why I'm asking.
Yeah. Now, first of all, this is a very admirable thing that you're doing. This is a reason that what was why I'm talking to you as well. That we should gather together. We should talk it out. And we should
Mm,
have others who participate, and we've got younger generation and others kind of taking courage and becoming better than us when they are our age. Because being
hmm.
honest, I think
Yes,
every generation that's coming up is smarter than the previous one, and
yes,
that's
yeah.
that's
Well, they
just
should
how
be.
that's just how things are. It's the
Hmm.
nature of the things. Um, I personally, we I do this on my channel on a weekly basis as well. Just the same thing,
Hmm.
where we set up, like even tomorrow we have in Urdu, Hindi, an open invite for anybody to come up and just talk about the Quran, right? Any ayat
Hmm.
that they've been reading or thinking, have been pondering. We're not there. I don't put myself as a lecturer or
Hmm.
as an
Yes.
authority. It's more, I think, or in my understanding, up until at this point, this is how it could be taken, or this is where you could be refining it. So it's
Hmm.
something that I think we have been doing. I guess one of the reasons for this channel as well is, my channel is to kind of foster this behavior of people feeling free
Hmm.
to ponder
Hmm.
and question and talk about the Quran. So if there's
Yes.
any areas for symbiosis or any areas for interaction or integration with other groups, yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Wonderful. Well, let me discuss this with Brother Mohammed and my wife, Sister Amina, because we're going to work up. We've just done a whole lot of restructuring for our website, and we have different things going on in the background, and we want to establish a webinar presence for this, that, and other reasons. This would be part of that program, and I would leave it up to someone like Mohammed to come up with the pertinent questions. I want someone from his generation to intelligently ask the questions that are reflecting what is on the mind and in the hearts of his generation, you see, at this point.
Mm,
So these 20 years behind you, and I'm 30 years ahead of you, and we've got this sort of continuum going on here. And this, it does, as much as I hate Madam Clinton, she is correct. It does take a village to raise the
mm,
child. You have to have the right
indeed.
village, you have to have the right circle, you have to have the right intentions. So let me discuss this with Sister Amina. And the reason I want to do it is because on occasion, you see, we want a couple of stable factors here. If we get Mohammed involved, we get you involved, then those are two principal characters that are always going to be here when we announce another webinar with so and so, and this is what we're going to do. So that's kind of like, oh, well, we know them. It's kind of like going back to your favorite TV show. You know who the star is, you know what the plot is, and all this sort of thing. So you go back to it, you feel comfortable. But you see, if we do this, then we can say, okay, well, here's the discussion for this week. Muhammad's going to be there, Moses is going to be there, and Instructor Bilal is going to sit in. You see,
Mm,
and you see that gives a whole different balance. The it's like giving students the assignment of a group of students. Say, okay, you got four kids here, and they're medical students, and their assignment is, okay, I want you to tell me everything about diabetes in 4 months. Okay, how it happens, what's the pathophysiology, what's the treatment, what are the complications. So you got four students, each one of you take one of those topics, and so and so is you're the director, and so is going to be your faculty advisor, and we have a guest advisor from the University of some going to sit in for the section. Then you see you've got to focus. See, I'm not talking about fixing these things in a rigid form. I want it to be open and fluid, but the people involved is what makes the circle sacred, and their intention is what makes the circle sacred. If you've got the circle and you've got the right persons and the right intentions, then the guidance that you're looking for, the hidayah that you're looking for, is going to follow, because Allah says, if you reach out to me, I'm going to come, I'm going to be there. You see, so I firmly believe in that principle. For me, it's an archetypal spiritual reality, okay, and without all the hocus pocus supernatural.
mm,
It's supranormal, okay? The Quran says it's going to happen. If God says, I'm closer to you than your jugular vein, I believe it. I don't care. I don't care, because I have experience of this now. after so many years, I don't care how God communicates with it. It doesn't matter as long as the communication's there. So we're making the salat, you see. These kind of venues, we're establishing the masjid. This thing is a masjid, okay?
Mm.
It's a,
Absolutely.
it's a masjid. So if we establish that masjid, we say, okay, on a regular basis, maybe once a month, we're going to have Muhammad and Moses discussing this, that, and the next thing. And this month, Dr. Omar is going to be there, and then next month, something like that. It's loose, but it's going to be there. It'll be like a season, you know. You
Mm.
always autumn's coming, okay? And so when you know autumn's coming, it's like a good business. So you open up a little hot dog stand. People start buying your hot dogs when they're good and they know you're going to be there at the same time. I know a guy raised his family with a little hot dog stand on the corner. Right? He was
Mm.
there every day at the same time doing the same thing with the same quality goods for years. Put all his kids through university. A little
Wow.
hot
Can't
dog
have,
stand.
can't do it today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, I'm just saying, if you establish these things, you make it a regular habit. The habit with the right intention invites the correct response from heaven. So I'm asking you to help me get that response from heaven for the sake of our students, brother.
Yeah, and as I said, it's something that I've already been doing, part of my salat, exactly as you said, right? That's exactly how I understand it to be. The very
Very
little
good.
back that I can give, you know, I'm I'm a terrible person, despite what
Oh,
my voice might tell you, you know.
yes.
But that the one of the few good things I do is to at least be part of these knowledge sharing,
Hmm.
even if it's not knowledge sharing, it's just making sure that others can see that you're out there, that there are people
Hmm.
who are not only thinking what you're thinking, but are talking
Hmm.
about it and give you the encouragement to go further. Because I'd like to think that
Yes.
50 years from now, I would like to say all of these conversations are mainstream. We've got genuine scholars who are
Yes.
way beyond anything that we find ourselves today at. But to get
Hmm.
to that point, we have to be doing whatever we can now.
Hmm. Yes. Alhamdulillah. Well, with that being said and agreed on, then, dear brother Moses, let's give it some prayer and a little bit of time, and I'll try and do what I can to organize at my end and keep you informed. Thank you so much for joining us and
Sounds good.
making this a possibility. Alhamdulillah. Any other remarks you'd like to leave us with, brother?
No, just thanks for having me over. Yeah, and inshallah, as we've talked today, hopefully
Mhm.
it'll spark more people to start talking.
Very
That's all
good.
I want. That's all I seek.
Yes, and it's important. Look, it's kind of. I'll leave you with one um, observation here. Um, one of the discords, one of the causes for discords between the family and authorities at the school right now is because the school is not reflecting what the morals and the ethics that are being discussed in the home, if they're
Mm,
discussed. So that if you see students see people like myself and Instructor Bilal and Brother Karim and others interacting in a peaceable manner and uh, always producing some sort of fruit, whatever these interactions are, then they say, oh, well, this is a place where we can expect something. uh, it's like a restaurant. There's certain restaurants you go to, you know the food's always going to be good. You see,
mm,
so let's just show this interaction that's taking place for the sake of the students, so they can say, "Oh yeah, well, there's Dr. Omar. He doesn't agree with everything, but look, he and Moses are discussing this, and you know, Karim said the same thing about 3 weeks ago in one of his discussions. So there must be something to this thing. So when people see a group of their elders discussing, I mean, why would they want to go look at a group of strangers they don't know anything about? But if they see a group of elders whom they know, each of them, then they see these elders sitting together discussing things of importance, they're going to be all the more attracted to it, I would imagine. And it,
you remind me. So
Yes.
there's another doctor that I talk to
Mm-hmm.
on the Urdu streams, Dr. Iqbal,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
he's very much like you. It's
Mm-hmm.
just funny. I'll mention
Yes,
you
go
to
ahead.
him, and he'll
Mm-hmm.
watch you afterwards. But it's just
Yes.
hilarious that what you're saying is very similar to what he says.
Well,
So
then there
absolutely
we
the
go.
same thing. He has
There
become
we
a
go.
familiar voice, and this
Mm-hmm.
voice of comfort for many people, just
Yes.
because we keep having these discussions, and
Yes.
three or four of us sit together, we talk. Yes, we may
Yes.
not agree on everything, but as you said, you come to the
Very
restaurant,
good.
based upon where your understanding
Yes.
is, you will find something that'll appeal to you. And that's fantastic.
Alhamdulillah. Wonderful. So thank you very much once again, dear brother. And until next
Shukran for
time,
having me. And okay.
yes. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.